The first one is just sort of, I was thinking about evals specifically during this time. And I think we touched on it a couple weeks ago. But just like, I'd love to go more in depth about, I guess, in this time, specifically during quarantine with virtual training, how evals differ between if it's a personal training client or a physical therapy client. I know you said, I think, it's been more like continuing with clients you've had in the past. But so then maybe if it doesn't apply to now, just in general, how your evals would be different between those two.
Well, I've had, I would say, 3 evals that have been physical therapy oriented for people I have never assessed before, and then I had one that was like an old client that came back, and I mean, I just had to like kind of reprioritize. Like, there's certain movement assessments that I would look through, but for the most part, I'm just looking at there's going to be an assumption that people are going to struggle with like breathing, or just have not been educated on that. I think is a better way to look at it. It's not necessarily a struggle. It's just like that's an easy place to start virtually. That is sort of a catch-all for a lot of issues. So if you have different types of back pain, you have different types of shoulder issues, just having people understand how the breath corresponds to stability as well as mobility and movement, and seeing where people are at with that. Usually that's like a really good starting place, and then you can put people into different positions and talk about the breath in those positions. So you can get a lot of assessment just by looking at like the positions that you're getting people in. So say it's half kneeling, tall kneeling, quadruped, and then how do they do with breathing? So one, you can visually see, but a lot of times I'm asking people, do my words make sense? Like, because you know how breathing can be, it could be very subtle, but can you feel that? And it'll be with, the breath through expansion, but it'll also be, can you feel the muscles contract where I want you to feel them contract? Can you feel it correspond to an exhale? So that's where I'm starting with a lot of people, and I find that that's important to do anyway. But if you have like your hands that you can use, you may not spend as much time working on that because you can be doing other things. So I mean that's kind of where I've been starting with people, and then just putting them in different positions. Now the other thing is you can use pain, like any pain provocation, as your assessment with just different movements that you want to see people do. So I can get someone started. I usually do like a circuit that's sort of a giant set of a squat pattern, some type of push-up pattern, or the process of, wherever someone is in a push-up. Maybe a lunge, maybe like some type of kneeling, like either a split squat or a lunge pattern. If I don't think somebody's going to be stable there, I'll put them into even like a bridge, and I'll deconstruct a bridge. And then I'll look at, depending on, their body type, I might look at like a quadruped position. I might look at like a side plank position, like some type of body hold that would be like, like a core specific planking motion. But I might put someone on their back for that in like a table or a crab position, or I might have them do quadruped. Versus like if there's somebody that's a narrow, like I'm looking quadruped. If somebody is like a little bit wider, then I'll probably look at having them doing some things on their side. But I want to look at any onset of pain in those movements, and if there is none, then it's like, okay, that could be a training regimen for them that can get them feeling active and not being in pain. And then we can try to find out where's the provocation of pain with anything that does bring it on. So I think that that works pretty well virtually. Like you don't usually need your hands, and it's not even about having like a good eye. It's just about making sure you're communicating, like, tell me when something hurts. And if something does hurt, then you have a whole conversation around that, and you can really get the corners of the onset of pain, and that gives you a lot of information.
Right. Okay. Awesome. And so you're using that giant set as both an eval in terms of seeing how they move, but also seeing where pain comes on And then if there isn't pain, then it's like you can use this as an intervention in a sense.
Right. And
Or
I
a
like to
training.
think of, and you know, Parkinson's law of like 80-20. Like I like to think of there's an 80-20 relationship to how much you should work around your pain, like do things that don't hurt versus working on the things that do hurt. And like, to be honest, like you should be doing 80% stuff that doesn't hurt, like just so you can kind of keep yourself active, keep yourself conditioned, and then also just not making it psychologically about what you can't do, make it about what you can do.
Right.
And so I like to have it like that mindset going in, even if I'm working with someone in person. The more the session starts to look like a personal training session, the better prognosis there is for somebody. Like the more they can do, the better, because it stops being like that they're a patient, and it just becomes, okay, like I have something I have to work around, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
still being very active. And the people that I know that are the most fit, or that are in that world of staying very active and understand their bodies well, they're always dealing with something, you know, and it just is a matter of like, how far are you going into that something, right? Like I can I can bring a shoulder pain on if I do
Yeah.
certain things. And just the knowledge of like how I have to be careful around that, but certainly not limiting my other work that is nowhere near that, is what makes, I think, makes somebody able to be versatile and keep going and being fit. Because if pain stops you every time you have it, you're going to be stopped a lot, right?
Right.
So I think it's important to be an educator on how to move around pain when it comes on, and just not look at it as something to be fearful of, but looking at it as information in your movement endeavors.
Right.
So yeah, I like that. I mean, that's just a simple, you know, like if I had like a TRX with someone, I would probably add a row in there, some type of pulling motion.
Right.
If somebody has like a bar, I'm gonna maybe look at a hang. If they can do pull-ups, I would have them do pull-ups. Like I might throw a pull into that circuit, but at
Mm-hmm.
home I've been just kind of neglecting that a little bit. And plus, a lot of times when people do pulls, they're, you know, if they need movement, there might be over compressing or something like that. So sometimes it's better to not add the concentric squeeze element to the pull, but like put them in the positions that would open them up a little bit first, and
Mm-hmm.
then you can kind of tie that into a pull. So for instance, like if somebody had a bar, I might have them do a hang exercise before I have them do a pull up, if we're trying to work on shoulder movement, shoulder stability, just so that they can have some time to focus on, again, breathing in a static position before tying it into just the idea of being stronger pulling up. But again, if they can do that without pain, then I'm not going to limit them, because I want them to feel like they can keep going forward, unless I feel like having them do that is getting in the way of some other goal.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I'm just thinking about pulling exercises right now. If like I understand putting them in a position to hang that can create some, you know, open them up in a certain area. If you're looking to open some up, like if you do a pull, say it's a unilateral pull,
Mm-hmm.
and you're sort of closing off that area on one side, you're essentially, can you also be doing that, but then you're opening up the other side reciprocally? So
Yeah.
then can you get sort of, you kill two birds with one stone with that?
Yeah, I mean, if your goal is to improve like motion in the shoulder, then a lot of times, or you can think of it as like work around your lack of motion, just
Yeah.
to kind of, you know, have some type of strength element, but like not continue to limit your range of motion. Unilateral stuff works well, but if you have the idea of how you want to breathe around that, you can really guide how much do you want it to be this concentric force production movement, and how much do you want it to be a promotion of improved mobility or improved motion um, component. So let's just look at like a pull down at any point. Like I can think about like really packing in. I could be high tension the whole time. I could squeeze the rhomboids together. I could retract hard, pull down throughout that whole motion, and then I can keep the tension even on the eccentric. And I can do most of that in some version of like a breath hold or an exhalation, dominant movement. Versus if I can get a sense of like when I'm actually overhead, I'm thinking about breathing into my chest, I'm thinking about inhaling into my upper back, and I'm feeling the expansion there. On one side, it might be anterior, on the other side, it might be posterior. All right.
Mhm.
So if I'm in a position where I'm breathing anterior on one side and posterior on the other side, I'm rotating literally, right? So this moves me forward here. This expansion on the back would move me back there. So I'd be rotating towards the side where I have the posterior expansion. So if I'm focusing on that on the eccentric, or I can make that part of what I'm trying to maintain, even as I'm pulling down, that I have a sense of expansion. So the weight would have to be lighter there. But if I can keep an inhale and I'm holding the inhale and I'm holding that expansion as I pull down, well, now it becomes a different exercise. And the focus is on maintaining that, like trying not to compress, trying not to squeeze myself, but actually just moving my limb around my expanded thorax. That becomes a
Mhm.
very different exercise. So this is why, like, I usually start by just educating people on the different ways to control the breath and how that corresponds to movement, because there's not a right or wrong. It's a dependent on intent type of thing always.
Right. And so, but like if you are, can you focus though still on, say you're focusing, like you're looking at, breath, tying that in with unilateral movements to try to create expansion anteriorly or on one side, posteriorly on the other.
Hmm.
Can you still train strength to a certain extent in that, or does it become a completely different exercise? Like,
Yeah, it's I mean, it's all relative. It depends on how strong or like how much force production you want to create. So I
yeah,
think it becomes a definition thing then. Like, what's the definition of strength? I think there's the extreme that you would look at, like the extreme strength of high force production hypertrophy is usually at the opposite end of mobility anyway.
yeah,
So like don't try to do both at the same time.
right,
You know what I mean? Like, but understand the difference. So just if you just want to maximize like force production and hypertrophy, load that you're moving, have a counter, mobility movement to that afterwards. Don't try to do it in the same exercise.
right,
And
yep,
I think that's fine. And I think even for somebody that is would their movement would get further from optimal by doing, say, bilateral movements, like barbell movements, powerlifting movements. Well, those are also the movements that you're going to be able to easily create the most force with. So don't neglect those, especially if you're good at them. Don't neglect them. Just know like the difference between you're kind of going into your wheelhouse, and know when you're doing that too much, and have a bunch of exercises that are on the opposite end of that spectrum.
hmm,
So there's like no such thing as being the best at everything, and I think that's a important thing for someone to understand. Like if you're really really good at like bilateral movements, and that's what you're training, and you're getting closer to like the top with stuff there, then you're going to tend to be worse at stuff that makes you rotate, and your mobility might start to be limited. So just looking at things from that perspective, that there's these two extremes. From a health perspective, it's good to be a jack of all trades, master of none. But sometimes you want to program yourself into, maybe really biasing some goal, and that's fine. Just understand what that goal might take away on the other side, right? And that should always be changing, in my opinion. That like there's not like a perfect medley or perfect protocol. It's just mindfulness, really. Like, oh, okay, I know what I'm doing a lot of, and I know what that's going to take away from me. And then, if there's a sign that your body's breaking down, like you're getting a lot of symptoms, well, maybe the plan that you put out, the counterbalances that you created for that plan are just not sufficient. And you either need to increase those counterbalances, or you need to change your mode of training for a little while. But
hmm,
that's an ongoing dynamic process. It's not a right or wrong.
right. Like one more thing, I guess, on this topic is thinking about talking about unilateral exercises, and it's like I feel like it's become, not it's become, but like I think I see a lot of people doing like very heavy, for instance, like a heavy split squat, right? At a certain point, does that really just kind of become it almost, it's not bilateral, but at a certain point, does it almost become bilateral in nature? Because you just have to compress everywhere so much that you lose that reciprocal expansion compression. And then it's like, well, are you better off at that point just training a bilateral lift and then training the unilateral lift with a different intent to improve, say it's like cutting or something? Like, is there a better carryover to cutting than just doing heavy split squats and counting that as your work on that? Even though I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah,
But
no, it totally makes sense. And I mean, I think it's not dissimilar to what we were just talking about. Like
yeah.
sometimes you have to know your intention, and the heavier you go with any movement. So say you're initially focusing on mobility, what are going to be the things that go away when things get heavier? Well, it's going to be that variability of breath, that control of breath, right? So if you have an awareness of how you want to breathe and you add load and that intention of breath changes, well, maybe it's still valuable, but it's valuable in another way. Well, maybe now the force, the concentric tension just becomes too great for you to be thinking about doing the things you were trying to do with motion before. But
Mm-hmm.
it can still be now valuable for force production. And it's still different than the bilateral because you are, one hip is in extension, relative to the other. So to be able to control that with high tension is not necessarily a bad thing, especially if you're able to maintain your postural control in the way you want to. It's just a matter of looking at it as sort of a continuum. But I would say is like as you get stronger, so or as you get more load. So like if you think about the progressive overload model, the intention to go heavier gets you farther away from like trying to improve mobility, if you will. But with that being said, like you don't have to look at mobility and strength as like from a movement standpoint, your exercise selection as completely different types of movement. Like you can be in the same continuum. So like a split squat can totally be about movement and mobility and about strength in the same continuum. It just does matter how you load it, how you breathe, and what your intention is. So, which I love. Like, I don't think you need to have all of these special stretching exercises, for instance. Like you can really, if you just understand like these certain foundational movements, you can throw, like a little bit of a twist into them, a little bit of change in your breath intent, maybe a little bit of how you shift your hips or something like that. And it can become like perfect for what you need from a mobility perspective. But when you start adding load, you might throw some of that out because the goal is just to, basically maintain a certain direction and not try to throw anything else into the mix.
Okay, cool. So you touched a little bit on just this sparked my thought. Like a hip shift.
Mm-hmm.
I think I have somewhat of a grasp on this at this point. But I would just love to go over sort of the dynamics of what's actually, or what we think is actually happening there. Because from my understanding right now, depending on the angle of hip flexion, if like you're going to do a traditional hip shift into, say, like your right hip, if you're in lesser hip flexion, then you're shifting into a more externally rotated state. But if you're in like that 90-degree range of hip flexion, then you're shifting still into a more internally rotated state.
I would go based on like where the trochanter is of your femur. Okay. This is my current understanding of it because it is a tricky thing, and whether you're in the process of inhaling or exhaling matters too. So anytime you're actually inhaling like and expanding, you're moving towards external rotation relative, right? Like so even if you had started in what would be thought of as an IR position, adding in inhale to that moves that relatively closer to ER. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So if you look at where the trochanter is though, and we went over a pretty, I think, helpful example for this. When you're in gait, like and you're standing on a leg, like you're weight bearing through your leg, your shoulders tend to be right over your hip, right? That weight-bearing side, so that the side that's loaded, tends to be in IR. Like you would think about pulling up into the socket, but you could feel your trochanter tends to be a little bit more anterior. So like it's rolled a little bit more anterior. So if you think of it that way, that would be what your reference is for IR versus ER. Now, if I tip forward and I go into more of like a lateral stance, so I started it, I'm loading the same leg, but now I hinge forward. So let me see if I can do this with my toes. But if I'm in standing like this, right?
Yeah.
I'm in IR, like I can feel, I'm back through my outer heel. I feel that in my trochanter here, as I suck in and I feel the abs here too, I went into IR. So this is also a way to kind of like, there's a lot of things you got to think of. So say I just shift back into that heel and I don't get my ribs down, I don't get this like internal oblique idea here, then I went into ER actually because I kicked my hip back. So now the trochanter went back. Even though I'm back in the heel and I might still feel the adductor. Yeah, so when I take that into a bigger display here, this becomes my lateral stance. Like I'm still loaded in this leg. Now I went into IR because this trochanter kicked back, but my trunk also came forward because now I'm going to load and go that way, right? Where in gait, I'm up here. If I have full kind of load to this side, I want internal obliques here, adductors, so that's like hip extension through there. Okay, I want my hamstring engaged. And as I exhale more, I get more ascension of the pelvic diaphragm on the same side here. I'm going to get more and more IR here, right? But if I take it and I load it back here, and this is also then going to be, because I'm preparing, this is going to be somewhere where I want to inhale and expand so that I can compress and take off. That becomes an ER type of movement, but I'm doing kind of the same thing. Like here, I'm sucking up into the socket. Here, I'm sucking up into the socket, but I just changed my direction and trajectory. Does that make sense there?
Yeah.
So like,
so then
the trochanter would be the thing that I would focus on. That seemed to be the thing that made the most sense when I was at the intensive, and we had a pretty in detail discussion about that because it's confusing certainly confusing for me. It was confusing for a lot of people.
Yeah. So then if you have, I guess like I'm thinking about this in a more in like a practical with clients scenario. If you have, so say you have someone who's a wide infrasternal angle, or who in theory should have good internal rotation and extension, adduction, everything that rides along with that. But then they get to that point where it's enough compressive compensatory mechanisms where they lose that. Do you then try to put them into more of those positions to get IR back? Like, so if you're thinking about gait, are you looking at hip shifting? If you're going to hip shift someone in a certain exercise, are you looking at putting them in more of that where your head is above the like where you're more in line, like your head's above the trochanter, versus going more into that ER position, like you were demonstrating a lateral stance?
Well, it depends. It depends on what they're limited with. So, I mean, I think you more often than not, especially the people that we would see that are athletes and very strong, they're the bias, the kind of archetype for the wide infrasternal angle is to you lose ER, right? But typically what you see is you lose both because people are compressed down the line quite a bit. So you're going to need to work on both. And it's important to sort of understand when you are working on one versus the other for this conversation. But a lot of times you'll need to look at both. And where that starts, though, oftentimes is getting people to understand like where to breathe and how that corresponds to one versus the other. So, for instance, like if you want to open up the pelvis a little bit and get a little bit more ER, then you're going to want to have people be able to first just posteriorly, orient the pelvis so that they can get to a point where an inhale gets low and might go into the base of the sacrum, and just to be able to feel that, and to be in a position that they're not fighting against their own forces like too much. So something that's like a plank position or a quadruped, like their bellies might be so big going downward that to try to pull up and find the angle that expands on the backside there posteriorly might just be too much work, especially early on. So you may want to put people on their back or on their sides and get just a sense of, can you feel like a breath moving into the like posterior sacrum area, like that you're trying to expand that with an inhale? Can you get a sense that, the pelvis is widening, but it's also kind of taking your narrow tube, your kind of AP narrow tube, and making it a little bit more spherical, 360. And then just do that in different positions. So for me, like I'll spend a lot of time just having people hold positions that they're comfortable spending time in. And we talked about this last time about like the deep squat. So an assisted deep squat, like the bottom of a deep squat ends up being more ER. So if you can get people down there, but really like feeling like they can be restful down there and they can breathe low in there, I think there's a lot of value to that. And it might be a very slow, gradual process, but I also find it to be something that's a good goal for people, just to say like, what's uncomfortable about this position for you? Where do your feet have to be now? Eventually, like we'd like to see that your feet come in a little bit more, and that's still not uncomfortable for you, that your belly and your thighs are able to connect, and like that compression in the front, it doesn't become so uncomfortable because you're able to take an expansive inhale and give yourself space for that. So
Right.
I like to give people that onset of kind of discomfort, that onset of compression, so that they have to feel what it's like to take an inhale that gives them some space there. And that teaches, I think, expansion down lower, which would then promote a little bit more ER.
Right.
And then I think with IR, you have to be careful because especially in the squat, it's going to be very concentrically driven. So I wouldn't use that for somebody who's, like already strong. If you think about it, like concentrically oriented and like a typical, like a power lifter type of body type. But I'll put them into a position that they're rested. So I might have somebody just in like a 90-90, but then biasing a little bit more IR at that point, and then focusing on like a little bit of a squeeze in, but trying to minimize how much tension they use by putting them in a position that's easier for them to focus on, like a longer exhale as opposed to a pressurized exhale. And that longer exhale corresponds to more in-socket activity, maybe with a little bit more feet outside of the hips, depending on what position you have them starting in. Being mindful of like actually having them visualize like the internal rotation, because again, that could be tricky if you're just pushing straight down and you don't get the inward motion of the femurs, you don't get the trochanters moving kind of more anterior or medial, then you might actually be biasing ER without noticing it.
Okay. And then and then if you have if you flip-flop the scenario and you have someone who's more narrow, less strength training background, who should have better external rotation capabilities and less internal rotation, would you sort of do in a sense that, I guess, you go after something they should have, so you do go after that external rotation to, in a sense, like normalize their pattern? Does that make sense? I guess you go after what they don't have.
Yeah, I mean, I think you go after what they don't have, and you, to a certain extent, it really depends on like how much success does this person need early on too.
Yeah.
So I guess in my experience with narrows, the narrows I see, they tend to be women that are 50 plus, 60 plus. They don't have like a lot of ambition to be like super strong, but they need that strength. They're better at or they enjoy the aerobic side of things a lot more than they do the anaerobic side of things.
Yeah.
So a big piece for me is to give people the success. Like don't neglect your aerobic stuff, but maybe change it into stuff that's a little bit more interval based. Like play around with actually going a little faster instead of making it the same steady state for a while. Because if you think about a narrow, they're going to be better at rotating.
Yep.
So a lot of aerobic stuff that has a reciprocal component to it, like an elliptical, might be just right up their alley. But the problem is like you stay on there too long and it becomes just overuse of so many different things.
Yeah.
That's the place that they feel comfortable. So it's a matter of balancing that out, because that could also be very helpful for anxiety and things like that, just to get that type of continuous movement in there, but doing it in a way that it doesn't become excessive, or programming it in a way that breaks it up. So you can even tie in a little bit more muscle activity with speed and things like that. So on the other side, then I would say getting them to be comfortable with strength-based movement and not think of it as something that intimidates them is usually like a big part of what I'm going to go with there. And I don't necessarily always think of it as like ERIR at that time, although you can easily back it down or break it down into that. But I just put people in positions that it's easiest to be strong, or creates the most force. And oftentimes that would be like in a mid-range of a lot of positions, or where there's the most axial loading on the long bones. So if you think about the real narrow typical situation, they might be the likelihood of osteoporosis situation too. And you want to kind of load the long bones, but you've got to be careful that you don't overdo it. So it's still, progressive overload, being very careful. A piece of it first, in my experience, is it's not like there's no protocol to it. It's basically you got to get over the psychology of like, I'm afraid of this. And there might also be some like aftermath discomfort because the body's not used to it, and figuring out how much is too much and being able to have the conversation the next time someone comes in and this hurt, and say, okay, like that didn't mean we broke you. That just means that like this was maybe a little bit beyond your threshold right now. Let's do a little bit less, or even the same thing, and watch it's not so bad the next time. It is to me more of a traditional, I don't want to say traditional, but it is a strength training regimen that you're looking at trying to just get people to tolerate load more. But tolerance is the word, not so much like, performance.
Yeah. Right. Makes sense. And it's with those clients we've talked before about, like, who maybe you do need to create that more compression through strength training. So maybe you do play around with using back squats or something along those lines to create more of that loading, axial loading. Okay.
Yeah. And one of the things that actually I talked to Bill Hartman about this specifically, and was I thought it was like the back rack idea was a good way to kind of load the bones, and it can be, but like you still don't want to think about like, oh, I really want to over compress anything if you can help it.
Right.
So if you have this back rack, by nature, you're going to be more compressive on the backside. So just even the way you cue people to hold on to a bar can matter depending on what your goal is. Like if you really want to open up the front here, well, squeezing the back does that, right?
Yeah.
But it also makes it harder to breathe on the backside. So, narrows need to be open. They need to be able to breathe well too, right? So it's you compress down here, but getting a sense of being in a position where the front can be open and the back can be open. So if I have someone in a back rack, a lot of times I'll have them gently focus on like underneath the armpit, but also like a spreading of the bar so that there's a sense that the shoulder blades you're not pulling back, that there's like a lengthening and an opening there, and see how they can breathe there. But then you can also work on just getting the front squat with getting the elbows up here, which is a little trickier for people. I don't have one of these safety squat bars, but I think those are, you can do a lot with those because you can create the angle that you want to open the front and open the back at the same time. So you might have to use a little bit of trial and error depending on who you're working with. But I've found it to be just psychologically valuable to just show some people that have just no barbell history that you're not going to break if I put this bar on your back, and I can assist you in any way you need. We have a light bar and we can progress, and there's actually a nice progression that happens pretty quickly. And there's a confidence that comes with just having the bar there, even if there's no load, that I think is pretty valuable with that population.
And I feel like it's good because, like, it compared to kettlebells or something, like, you can make such incremental jumps and see that progress that I feel like that's a good, gives them that feeling of success more often, in a sense.
Absolutely.
What do you do with clients who are hypermobile? I feel like a lot of people are struggling or lacking mobility. What do you do with the people that show up and are like, their measures say like they just have 50 degrees of IR and like 60 or 70 degrees of hip ER or something?
All right, to answer this generally, I would just say that you look at, there's usually a place where somebody that looks hypermobile also is lacking motion, right? Because it's not just like every joint in the body has looseness. It's usually positional that allows for certain areas to get more motion, and other areas then have to kind of stay in one position to keep those joints moving a lot. So that you can think of like the pelvis is a good example. Like somebody who looks like they have a ton of hip mobility might also have like a dumped forward pelvis. So anytime you try to get them into anything that looks like hip extension, their body won't go there. It just becomes motion from elsewhere. So I would find those places where people aren't moving well due to compensation. And then I would focus on trying to, make them be able to feel the difference, like feel the non-compensation position, which ends up taking you back to just getting someone to be a little bit more concentric, a little bit more active with their muscles so that they can hold themselves in a position better that otherwise they'd just be continuing to compensate out of because they have so much available motion, even if it's always from the same patterns. So if you get someone in half kneeling, for instance, that has like they're just anteriorly oriented in the pelvis, it keeps dumping forward. So it's really hard to have them try to extend their hip because they just keep going into another pattern. Just putting them in half kneeling, the knee that's down is always going to be more extended, or it would be you'd be able to promote extension on that side more. But what do they have to feel to actually get hip extension? Well, it would be some sense of an upward movement of the pelvic floor. It would have to be a sense of maybe the inner thigh, some adduction, coming online, and a feeling of just really being able to control the exhale, and that exhale creates a lifting sensation, as opposed to if, say, you let go of the pelvis and you have this anterior pelvic tilt, this dump, everything's usually going to kind of want to collapse away from the ground. So having this sense of really being able to feel those muscle contractions on an exhale, lift them away from the ground. So the knee, into the socket type of feeling. The opposite leg, the foot that's down, might, push into the ground a little bit to level out the pelvis and just give them a sense of that activity. And then you can spread that out a little bit. So have them take advantage of the motion that they do have, but teach them how to create contractions in that mobility little by little. So like bring them back to something that is easy for them to do from a mobility standpoint, but hard for them to do from a concentric, like muscle control standpoint. And then take the feeling that they've got, the concentric muscle activity that they've got in like a more standard neutral position, and then spread that out and take them, like show them how far can you really go without just basically like falling into a position that your body allows you to fall into. Like how far can you go into from a half kneeling position close to a front split, but still keep the same muscle cues that you had when you were in that original half kneeling position. So that's what I'll usually do with people that have that mobility, is that I'll make their motion smaller, get them to feel some muscle contractions, and then say, all right, if you want to go back into that flexibility you have to demonstrate that you can still feel what you felt in this, easier position feel it in.
Right.
So it just becomes like a game of inches of increasing that mobility, but now the prerequisite has to be some type of concentric cueing, that you want them to be able to maintain so that they have that control throughout the whole motion.
And you're saying too, it's like a lot of times what's presented as hypermobile in one area of the body could be due to a limitation in another area.
Yeah.
So then addressing that limitation or something could that reduce motion in that hypermobile area to bring it back to more of a, not like normal, but like normalized standard of something? And are you ever trying to purposely measure and do that? Or is that something that just sort of comes if you put them in the right position and address where they are limited?
Yeah, I mean, like if you look at like a hip joiner, for instance, like there should be a total arc of motion. A shoulder joint, the same thing, like a total arc of motion that you see. So let's look at like a baseball pitcher's shoulder, for instance. So if there's 180 degrees of the arc of motion and someone's got like crazy ER, which you would expect on like a lot of baseball pitchers on the side that their throwing arm. Well, let's say that they have 120 degrees going this way, or maybe 140 degrees. They only have 40 degrees of IR, but that's sort of like a normal arc of motion there. That's a positional orientation change, but they still have their full motion there. So I think you want to have that arc in your head. With the hip, it might be like 100-degree arc that you're looking at, right? Like 60-40 or something like that. If it's somewhere that's not within that, like it's either beyond that 100 total or it's less than. If it's less than, you definitely want to try to find that full arc again first and try to find that mobility. If it's somewhere outside of that, or if it's beyond that, you probably have to focus on like reorienting, repositioning more than you're going to have to try to do any type of specific hip mobility work. But I was kind of have the goal of starting from the center out no matter what. And I think you're safe there. Like, so for instance, to take out of like, oh, this person's hypermobile, this person's hypomobile, like just get a sense of, all right, can they breathe in a way that is going to be valuable for when you put them in an exercise that they can now control what you want them to control. So generally the mechanics of the breath will be very similar. It's just, do you want to bias more of inhalation to create expansion, to create motion, or do you want to bias more compression to create muscle contraction, to create maybe a stability or holding, which then can bias a little bit of IR, which can, versus ER. But a lot of times when you're looking at someone that is that narrow, that hypermobile presentation, you're looking at promoting IR, but you're doing it in a concentric way. So you're doing it as like a strength element, as opposed to you're trying to improve mobility, or like, I don't actually need to like have them turn as much into that, what we would think of as like an IR position, but I need them to be able to create like a posture. I need them to create stability in a posture, not have them collapse into a posture. And then when they breathe in, if it's like shoulder IR that we're looking for, that can they expand anterior into the the pump handle in that, because then if they can't, then they're having a compensation that they'd be losing the mobility there. But it doesn't look like a loss of mobility the way it would with somebody who's stiff. It's just, it's like you can't keep up with the compensations when somebody's hypermobile. They're still limited in motion. It's just that they don't know it because they can so easily find another way. And sometimes it's hard for you to recognize it as a therapist too. So most of the interventions end up looking like, stability oriented things, but the breath again becomes the thing that you're trying to direct to actually create motion, even though it looks like you're creating stability. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does.
So think about like quadruped, for instance. If you have somebody who you want to gain shoulder and hip IR, all right, but let's just look at shoulder. You're not putting him into what would be like thought of as a stretch or anything that would be near an end range, but you have their hands right under their shoulders to get more IR would just be, can you breathe into your chest better without losing position anywhere else?
Yeah.
And feeling like there's no collapse, like you'll be able to see it in the posture. So if there is a veering from your postural control, that's them trying to work away from the motion that they don't have.
Yeah.
Right? And going into what they're comfortable with. And part of that though is a lack of strength, because gravity is winning.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. So it's like with those people, it's more, they're just so good at they're just so good at like compensating in some way or another to get more motion that it can be hard to determine, versus if you have the people that are stiff, it's like they just can't get the position.
Yeah.
Or they can't even like just not disguise, but like compensate to get into that position in a sense.
Right. Yeah. And so it's often easier to work with somebody that is stiff, because they at least have a starting point of, they know that they're stiff. Like they know that they have a limitation, because they just have much more of a proprioceptive awareness of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the hard part there is to actually help people calm down when they're trying to improve mobility, like get them to breathe in a manner that there's not this concentric holding, that you can actually let go. So again, the breath becomes such a major part of that. Can you sense where you feel blocked with your breath? Can you get more of an even motion of pressure through your body? Well, by being able to do that, that naturally brings the nervous system into a place that's like more accepting of motion, as opposed to a place that's resisting motion. But the natural starting point for a lot of the people that are hypomobile would be resisting of motion, because they can create a lot of force, and that is a compressive element where it's just like you're trying to squeeze your muscle to drive motion, as opposed to being able to allow motion, like more internally.
Yeah.
You look at it. But somebody who is hypermobile or pre-hypermobile, I look at it as it's sort of like trying to herd cats, right? Like you try to get them into one position that you're trying to promote, and then immediately something else, they won't have a perception of it. They'll just be like, yeah, this is the easiest thing for me to do. And they don't even perceive that what you're giving them to do is challenging. They just get frustrated because you might give them cues that are contrary to what they think they need to do, or like just like, like without, beyond their understanding. And they're like, well, this isn't hard. But I'm like, you're not doing what I'm asking you to do. And they might not realize that. So you have to be really careful with, give them some type of external constraint, basically, to make it harder for them to compensate is a big part of it first. And then you can say, can you feel the breath here? And that takes a little while, and that takes trust, I think. Like my clients that have been successful with that are narrows, it's definitely not in the first like week. But it is like, or they don't necessarily perceive success in the first week. For me, I would, because I'm like, okay, this person's like apprehensive to exercise, and I didn't hurt them. So I'm like, okay, and they're continuing to come back, and they're being compliant with the things I'm asking to practice, so that they can build a better sense of what I want from them. And that really does carry over if you can just keep that consistency and that trust. And then you see people that were not curious about strength training become curious about strength training, because they see a process that's there, not just like what they thought that was marketed about strength training, weight smashing, and the idea of like bulking up and all of that. It becomes more about like a process that is for anybody, not just for like certain people.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting to think of, like, I don't know. It's just interesting. It's like people need it in a way. It almost seems to me like people, in a simple terms, like need more of what they just don't do. Like it's like those people who are hypermobile maybe need more of that strength training, high force production, but that also could tend to be the thing that they struggle with more initially, versus like your strongmen and power lifters probably need more of things that aren't high force, but it's like they're not as good at that initially. So it's hard to get that. I feel I don't know. Is that something you have to play with to get that buy-in from them, or maybe not, because if they're coming to you in pain and then they're feeling better, it's like, well, they buy into it that way.
Yeah, you definitely need to experience. Makes you better at educating people off the bat and making it specific to what they want at that moment. I think, and that's an ongoing process, but it's really important to know where somebody is, like, because the sports world, the performance world, is really like what's promoted to be the idea of best in some way, like best health, no matter what. Like, if you are the best at a sport, then that must mean you're the healthiest. And I think that that is absolutely opposite in many ways, right? So the people that we even look at in our industry that tend to have the best reputation are people that have worked with professional athletes in some way. And there's a lot of value to that, where that you can get this information and this experience with people that are at just the top of the top. So you get like a real, like, archetypical look at the human body from a high performance standpoint.
Yeah.
But there's always going to be, when you have that archetype, then you'll also have, like, you'll see the limitations in that, because you have to put so much time into getting good at very specific things. And when you get to be close to the best, it takes away from the stuff that it's just not worth your time to do, right? Like, you don't want to do everything when you're a specific athlete. You want to do the things that make you better, and you're always kind of comparing yourself to the people that are your competition. I don't think that the general population should think that way, but I think oftentimes they're confused into thinking that way. So that it's like, well, I got to work harder to lose weight. I got to work harder to get to my goals, because that's what a high level athlete does.
Yeah.
And even, they're learning about that in athletics now. It's like, athletics is so much about understanding recovery in a way that it likely wasn't before, because of technology and things like that. So we're really appreciating recovery, and there's a balance there. But in the general population, it's like there should never be anything but the balance if you're trying to promote health, right? Yeah. So, but that balance can be, all of the things, the capacity within that balance can all get better, depending on how much you understand your body, and how much consistency and time and you want to put into it. How organized are you with your behaviors and your programming and things like that? But you don't want to be the best in any one thing. You may want to, take what you're good at, and don't neglect it, but just understand like what it's doing for you. Have many options, I would say, to do things that are similar too. So have an eclectic approach to strength training, and like barbell versus kettlebell stuff, like, they're similar enough, but completely different enough that they can give you a nice balance. So I know if I'm doing barbell stuff, which I really get into a mode where I just love to do it. You know what I mean? Like like CrossFit style, and it feels good. And I like, whoever tells me I shouldn't do it, fuck them. Like, I just don't care. Like, I understand my body enough to know like what I'm getting from it, what I'm not getting from it, right? And then kettlebell training is also this, like, I'll use that more frequently because I think it's kinder to my body. But there's something that I'm not getting from that I'm getting from barbell training, and it's just nice to be able to go back and forth. So if I really want to be more traditionally, strong, powerful, and things like that, having two elements there, or just different apparatuses that I can use, give me enough versatility that oftentimes it allows me to be more robust in the training. But then there's definitely just going to be times where I need to calm shit down. And sometimes I can just sprinkle that in. And like for my personal workout, like, life, it's just, I like it when that's as little as possible, when I have to do the corrective stuff as little as possible. But sometimes my body's telling me that it needs to be more. You know? like, I don't want that to be my whole thought process around physical training, that I have to be super specific. I have to be static.
Mm-hmm.
I have to be like really mindful of position and things like that. I want to understand that really well so I can use that when it's time to use that. But I think the better I understand that, I could use it in more positions and I could actually use it more dynamically. So I'm able to really know when I'm not able to be where I want to be from a movement perspective, but I might be where I want to be from a performance perspective, but then know how to counterbalance that quickly. But it ends up being, I think you use less time in your correctives when you get your whole body more versatile.
Right.
You know?
That makes sense. Yeah.
And that's me personally, but it's like, I think I've come to the conclusion a long time ago that I want to do the opposite of being the best at something, and I certainly never was the best at anything, but like I did have a sports background where that was always my mindset, is like, I want to work hard to be as good as I can be at this sport, basketball. Like, I grew up son of a coach and things like that. So, but once I gave that sport up and I started getting into fitness in the other way, I realized like I actually enjoy fitness so much more, I think, than I did athletics, because there isn't the pressure of being the best. It's more of an exploration, right? It's like, okay, this is what I suck at. Like, I have no rush to get better at it. I could just keep like looking at this, but then there's something that's completely different that like I'm not touching on, and I can touch on that. So it's like this, it'll last your whole life type of idea. And you can always change it up, but it's all towards the common goal of health, which to me is much more exciting, because I don't have to compete. And some people love to compete, but like, I think when you let go of the loving to compete underneath that, you realize like, there's a lot of pressure behind that too, right? There's a lot of like fight or flight in that idea of always having to fight, to think like you're comparing yourself to others. So to be able to let go of that and say, there's just so many different ways to be healthy, but they're all movement and they're all, understanding your body. I think it's liberating.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something I'm constantly, not working on, but like going back and forth with, on just like how far to try to pursue some, arbitrary aspect of performance, and then, just
You're
playing
fresh
around.
out of your playing days still.
I know.
You're still fresh. You're pretty much still an athlete.
I know. Well, yeah, I know. Well, I was pretty much still an athlete. Never exactly was an athlete in a certain. Yeah.
You played college lacrosse. You're definitely.
Yeah. Well, athlete, a non-athletic athlete in a sense. Yeah. But
that's where, it depends on your definition of athlete. Then, like, I think competition versus non-competition maybe is a better way to define that, because, who's to say what an athlete is? But if you're playing in a competitive form and that's your mindset, and you have to go to practice and you have a coach and you have a team, there's a lot of stress and pressure, which is awesome sometimes. And I think when you're younger, I think that structure is really important.
Yeah.
But I think there's another way to do that too. Like, being a parent now, I'm always trying to explore that. Like, how do I promote activity, but maybe if my kids don't want it, if they don't want the pressure of competition, or even to be part of like a team, can they still get the health value of movement and just being able to experience like motion in their body, right? And not allow it to become something that is, we see a lot of the health effects of being sedentary or not having movement in your life. So I don't think it has to be sport, but I think sports just makes it easier for a lot of people, especially when you're younger.
Yeah. And then I guess it's sort of more play as you're younger, and then as you get older, that structure increases and that competition increases. But
and things are so different now than when I was growing up, than even when you're growing up. We're a generation different, but then like me raising a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, like I have to always guard against the nostalgia of like what I did growing up, because it's not there anymore. You know what I mean? And like my situation was different because my dad was a coach. So like the things I did when I was really young, I was just always around sport. Where like I'm not that I'm into movement and fitness, and my kids see me do that, but it's not sport. So I think I have to go there more than try to force them into a sport, but introduce them to it. Maybe something will take hold, but it's not wrong if they don't go there, and that's really hard for me to to kind of grasp, because there is nostalgia of like whatever I did growing up should be the way that somehow my kids live, and it's just a totally different time.
Yeah. That's definitely got to be a tough balance, I'm sure. But yeah,
it's fun. It's and again, I think just the conversation we had about fitness, where once you realize like it's an ongoing process and not you don't have to win something, it's actually more enjoyable. Like you can let go a little bit and just explore and care less about like anybody watching you and judging you or anything like that. Just make sure I think there's some things that are easy to do. It's like just love your kids and be there for them, and be curious about being better. But like if you're never great when you're always beating yourself up, right? Like, so it's I don't think, or I'm not, like I will crumble if I'm like constantly in a state of stressing over how I am compared to someone else.
Awesome.
All right, I have to go head out and go to Swiss Farms and get some milk and go get my mail at work.
Big outings.
Big outings.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be hobbling around on this toe.
Oh God, yeah. Not 20,000 steps today.
I'm gonna be sitting on the physio ball getting the arms moving. So instead of working on the rotation, it's just I still got it in yesterday. I just had to do it in a different way. That was a fun challenge, but the pain when I'm just sitting and sleeping is not fun.
Oh, so no.
That's always a good education on people that you will see as a therapist. Their pain is their number one complaint. So when you're in pain, it gives you empathy.
Yeah,
no doubt.
Absolutely. Yep.
This is a unique pain. Starting to feel a little bit better today. So maybe it's just this 48 hours of inflammation.
Yeah.
But it came on like a ton of bricks. It's very interesting.
Yeah, hopefully it's better in the next day or two.
Or I'll be finding other ways to move around. All right, awesome. We'll be in touch. Let me know if you have any questions this week.
All right, cool. Thanks, Chris.
Absolutely.
Have a good one.
Later.